Earlier this year, the Australian energy ministers introduced a carbon tax by stealth. We've done the maths. This regulatory sleight of hand could add up to 50% to your energy bills. So, what is the new price on carbon, and how much could it cost you? In March this year, the Australian energy regulator released the annual values for the shadow carbon price, known as the value of emissions reduction. These values were mandated by the state and federal energy ministers with no opportunity for feedback from consumers.
Nobody cares what you think.
The government's shadow carbon price starts at $66 per tonne. Accounting for inflation, this is more than double the carbon tax introduced by the Gillard government in 2011. By 2050, the shadow carbon price is set to skyrocket to $420 a tonne. We call this new value of emissions reduction a shadow carbon price for a reason. It's not a tax paid directly by consumers, nor is it a Gillard-style tax levied on mining or fossil fuel companies. Instead, it works as an incentive that rewards transmission and distribution companies for proposing network projects aimed at reducing emissions. The costs of these projects are then passed on to consumers through their energy bills. Let's break down how this works. Transmission networks are the poles and wires connecting large-scale generation, such as coal plants or solar farms, to distribution networks. Distribution networks then carry this electricity to homes and businesses. You can think of transmission as a highway for electricity, while distribution networks are the local road. The energy regulator is responsible for approving network projects built by transmission and distribution companies to strengthen or expand the grid. Once approved, these companies make a profit by passing these costs through to consumers in their energy bills. Let's take an example of a distribution company wanting to build a project that expands electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Now, for the regulator to approve a project, the benefits to consumers must outweigh the costs. For this particular project, the benefits are lower than the costs, so you would expect the proposal to be rejected. But because of the government's new policy, the company can now use the shadow carbon price to inflate the project's benefits. They can claim that this project will save transport emissions because more EV charging infrastructure should translate to fewer petrol cars. These added benefits mean instead of the regulator rejecting the proposal, it gets approved. The distribution company is now free to start building the project, getting a nice boost to their profits by charging consumers more. This is all supposed to be in the name of reducing emissions, but the assumed reductions are not guaranteed. After all, a network company can't force anyone to swap their petrol car for an EV. So, how much will this cost you? In our recent paper, we calculated if enough projects were approved today to achieve zero emissions, the average consumer could expect to pay as much as $855 more on their annual energy bills. This amount will vary with your electricity usage. The average couple in Sydney could face a maximum increase of $819. For a pensioner in Adelaide, this could be $459. A family of 5 in Melbourne could be looking at an extra $1,149 a year. And because the carbon price determined by the ministers is set to increase dramatically over the next few decades, these costs will only skyrocket in future years. For instance, if enough projects were approved to achieve zero emissions in 2040, this could push up energy bills by $1,294 a year. Given the current cost of living crisis, it is crucial that we have an evidence-based debate about the pros and cons of using a carbon price to reduce emissions. But to have that debate, state and federal governments must show transparency and accountability. Without it, consumers will once again be left in the dark facing yet another bill increase.